Chapter 20. A Few Days on Land. I was much impressed on touching land. Ned Land tried the soil with his feet as if to take possession of it. However, it was only 2 months before that we had become, according to Captain Nemo, passengers on board the Nautilus, but, in reality, prisoners of its commander. Without noticing all the beautiful specimens of Papuan flora, the Canadian abandoned the agreeable for the useful. He discovered a cocoa tree, beat down some of the fruit, broke them, and we drank the milk and ate the nut with a satisfaction that protested against the ordinary food on the Nautilus. "Excellent," said Ned Land. "Exquisite," replied Conseil. "And I do not think," said the Canadian, "that he would object to our introducing a cargo of coconuts on board." "I do not think he would, but he would not taste them." "So much the worse for him," said Conseil. "And so much better for us," replied Ned Land. "There will be more for us." "One word only, Master Land," I said to the harpooner, who was beginning to ravage another coconut tree. "Coconuts are good things, but before filling the canoe with them, it would be wise to reconnoiter and see if the island does not produce some substance not less useful. Fresh vegetables would certainly be welcome on board the Nautilus." "Master is right," replied Conseil, "and I propose to reserve 3 places in our vessel, one for fruits, the other for vegetables, and the third for the venison, of which I have not yet seen the smallest specimen." "Conseil, we must not despair," said the Canadian. "Let us continue," I returned, "and lie in wait. Although the island seems uninhabited, it might still contain some individuals who would be less sensitive than we on the nature of game." "Ho, ho," said Ned Land, moving his jaws significantly. "Well, Ned," cried Conseil. "My word," returned the Canadian, "I begin to understand the charms of anthropophagy." "Ned, what are you saying? You, a man-eater? I should not feel safe with you, especially as I share your cabin. I might perhaps wake one day to find myself half devoured." "Friend Conseil, I like you much, but not enough to eat you unnecessarily." "I would not trust you," replied Conseil. "But enough. We must absolutely bring down some game to satisfy this cannibal, or else one of these fine mornings master will find only pieces of his servant to serve him." While we were talking thus, we were penetrating the sombre arches of the forest, and for 2 hours we survived in all directions. Chance rewarded our search for eatable vegetables, and one of the most useful products of the tropical zones furnished us with precious food that we missed on board. I speak of the breadfruit tree, very abundant in the island of Gilboa. Ned Land knew these fruits well. He had already eaten many during his numerous voyages, and he knew how to prepare the eatable part. Moreover, the sight of them excited him, and he could contain himself no longer. "Master," he said, "I shall die if I do not taste a little of this breadfruit pie." Taste it, friend Ned. Taste it as you want. We are here to make experiments. Make them. It won't take long, said the Canadian. And, provided with a lentil, he lighted a fire of dead wood that crackled joyously. During this time, Conseil and I chose the best fruits of the artocarpus. Some had not then attained a sufficient degree of maturity, and their thick skin covered a white but rather fibrous pulp. Others, the greater number yellow and gelatinous, waited only to be picked. These fruits enclose no kernel. Conseil brought a dozen to Ned Land, who placed them on a coal fire after having cut them in thick slices, and while doing this, repeating, "You will see, master, how good this bread is. More so when one has been deprived of it so long. It is not even bread," added he, "but a delicate pastry. You have eaten none, master?" "No, Ned." "Very well. Prepare yourself for a juicy thing. If you do not come for more, I am no longer the king of harpooners." After some moments, the part of the fruits that was exposed to the fire was completely roasted. The interior looked like a white pastry, a sort of soft crumb, the flavor of which was like that of an artichoke. It must be confessed that this bread was excellent, and I ate of it with great relish. "What time is it now?" asked the Canadian. 2 o'clock at least," replied Conseil. "How time flies on firm ground," sighed Ned Land. "Let us be off," replied Conseil. We returned through the forest and completed our collection by a raid upon the cabbage palms that we gathered from the tops of the trees, little beans that I recognized as the abru of the Malays, and yams of a superior quality. We were loaded when we reached the boat, but Ned Land did not find his provision sufficient. Fate, however, favored us. Just as we were pushing off, he perceived several trees from 25 to 30 feet high, a species of palm tree. These trees, as valuable as the artocarpus, justly are reckoned among the most useful products of Malaya. At last, at 5 o'clock in the evening, loaded with our riches, we quitted the shore, and half an hour after we hailed the Nautilus. No one appeared on our arrival. The enormous iron-plated cylinder seemed deserted. The provisions embarked, I descended to my chamber, and after supper slept soundly. The next day, January the 6th, nothing new on board. Not a sound inside, not a sign of life. The boat rested along the edge, in the same place in which we had left it. We resolved to return to the island. Ned Land hoped to be more fortunate than on the other day before with regard to the hunt, and wished to visit another part of the forest. At dawn, we set off. The boat, carried on by the waves that flowed to the shore, reached the island in a very few minutes. We landed, and, thinking that it was better to give in to the Canadian, we followed Ned Land, whose long limbs threatened to distance us. He wound up the coast toward the west, then, fording some torrents, he gained the high plain that was bordered with admirable forests. Some kingfishers were rambling along the watercourses, but they would not let themselves be approached. their circumspection proved to me that these birds knew what to expect from bipeds of our species, and I concluded that if the island was not inhabited, at least human beings occasionally frequented it. After crossing a large prairie, we arrived at the skirts of a little wood that was enlivened by the songs and flights of a large number of birds. "There are only birds," said Conseil. "But they are eatable," replied the harpooner. "I do not agree with you, friend Ned, for I see only parrots there." "Friend Conseil," said Ned gravely, "the parrot is like pheasant to those who have nothing else." "And," I added, "this bird suitably prepared is worth knife and fork." Indeed, under the thick foliage of this wood, a world of parrots were flying from branch to branch, only needing a careful education to speak the human language. For the moment, they were chattering with parrots of all colors and grave cockatoos who seemed to meditate upon some philosophical problem, while brilliant red lories passed like a piece of bunting carried away by the breeze. Papuans with the finest azure colors, and in all variety of winged things most charming to behold, but few eatable. However, a bird peculiar to these lands, and which has never passed the limits of the Arrow and Papuan Islands, was wanting in this collection, but fortune reserved it for me before long. After passing through a moderately thick copse, we found a plain obstructed with bushes. I saw then those magnificent birds, the disposition of whose long feathers obliges them to fly against the wind, their undulating flight, graceful aerial curves, and shading of their colors attracted and charmed one's looks. I had no trouble in recognizing them. The Malays, who carry on a great trade in these birds with the Chinese, have several means that we could not employ for taking them. Sometimes they put snares at the top of high trees that the birds of paradise prefer to frequent. Sometimes they catch them with a vicious bird lime that paralyzes their movements. They even go so far as to poison the fountain that the birds generally drink from. But we were obliged to fire at them during flight, which gave us few chances to bring them down, and indeed we vainly exhausted 1/2 of our ammunition. About 11 o'clock in the morning, the first range of mountains that form the center of the island was traversed, and we had killed nothing. Hunger drove us on. The hunters had relied on the products of the chase, and they were wrong. Happily, Conseil, to his great surprise, made a double shot and secured breakfast. He brought down a white pigeon and a wood pigeon, which, cleverly plucked and suspended from a skewer, were roasted before a red fire of dead wood. While those interesting birds were cooking, Ned prepared the fruit of the artocarpus. Then the wood pigeons were devoured to the bones and declared excellent. The nutmeg, with which they are in the habit of stuffing their crops, flavors their flesh and renders it delicious eating. Now, Ned, what do you miss now? Some four-footed game, Monsieur Arronax. All these pigeons are only side dishes and trifles, and until I have killed an animal with cutlets, I shall not be content. Nor I, Ned. if I do not catch a bird of paradise." "Let us continue hunting," replied Conseil. "Let us go toward the sea. We have arrived at the first declivities of the mountains, and I think we had better regain the region of forests." That was sensible advice, and was followed out. After walking for 1 hour, we had attained a forest of sago trees. Some inoffensive serpents glided away from us. The birds of paradise fled at our approach, and truly I despaired of getting near one, when Conseil, who was walking in front, suddenly bent down, uttered a triumphant cry, and came back to me bringing a magnificent specimen. "Ah, bravo, Conseil! Master is very good. No, my boy, you have made an excellent stroke. Take one of these living birds and carry it in your hand. If master will examine it, he will see that I have not deserved great merit." "Why, Conseil?" "Because this bird is as drunk as a quail." "Drunk?" "Yes, sir. See, with the nutmegs that it devoured under the nutmeg tree under which I found it. See, friend Ned, see the monstrous effect of intemperance." "By Jove!" exclaimed the Canadian. "Because I have not drunk gin for 2 months, you must needs reproach me." However, I examined the curious bird. Conseil was right. The bird, drunk with the juice, was quite powerless. It could not fly. It could hardly walk. This bird belonged to the most beautiful of the 8 species that are found in Papua and in the neighboring islands. It was the large emerald bird, the most rare kind. It measured 3 feet in length. Its head was comparatively small, its eyes placed near the opening of the beak and also small. But the shades of color were beautiful, having a yellow beak, brown feet and claws, nut-colored wings with purple tips, pale yellow at the back of the neck and head, and emerald color at the throat, chestnut on the breast and belly. 2 horned downy nets rose from below the tail that prolonged the long light feathers of admirable fineness, and they completed the whole of this marvelous bird that the natives have poetically named the bird of the sun. But if my wishes were satisfied by the possession of the bird of paradise, the Canadians were not yet. Happily, about 2 o'clock, Ned Land brought down a magnificent hawk from the breed of those the natives call bari-u-tung. The animal came in time for us to procure real quadruped meat, and he was well received. Ned Land was very proud of his shot. The hawk, hit by the electric ball, fell stone dead. The Canadians skinned and cleaned it properly after having taken 6 cutlets destined to furnish us with a grilled repast in the evening. Then the hunt was resumed and was still more marked by Ned and Conseil's exploits. The 2 friends, beating the bushes, roused a herd of kangaroos that fled and bounded along on their elastic paws. But these animals did not take flight so rapidly, but what the electric capsule could stop their course. "Ah, Professor," cried Ned Land, who was carried away by the delights of the chase. "What excellent game, and stewed too. What a supply for the Nautilus. 2, 3, 5 down, and to think that we shall eat that flesh and that the idiots on board shall not have a crumb." I think that In the excess of his joy, the Canadian, if he had not talked so much, would have killed them all. But he contented himself with a single dozen of these interesting marsupials. These animals were small. They were a species of those kangaroo rabbits that lived habitually in the hollow trees and whose speed is extreme, but they are moderately fat and furnish at least estimable food. We were very satisfied with the results of the hunt. Happy Ned proposed to return to this enchanting island the next day, for he wished to depopulate it of all the eatable quadrupeds, but he reckoned without his host. At 6 o'clock in the evening we had regained the shore. Our boat was moored to the usual place. The Nautilus, like a long rock, emerged from the waves 2 miles from the beach. Ned Land, without waiting, occupied himself about the important dinner business. He understood all about cooking well. The bariou tongue, grilled on the coals, soon scented the air with a delicious odor. Indeed, the dinner was excellent. 2 wood pigeons completed this extraordinary menu. The sago pasty, the artocarpus bread, some mangoes, half a dozen pineapples, and the liquid fermented from some cocoa nuts overjoyed us. I even think that my worthy companion's ideas had not all the plainless desirable. "Suppose we do not return to the Nautilus this evening," said Conseil. "Suppose we never return," added Ned Land. Just then, a stone fell at our feet and cut short the harpooner's proposition.